Today is May 1st, 2009, and we're speaking to Peggy here today. She's going to tell us some wonderful stories. Dazzle us with her humor, right? So why don't we start with telling me where and when you were born?
Born in Saskatoon, City Hospital, January 22nd, 1929. And we lived here for about 3 years. My dad worked for Palm Dairies, and then we moved to Edmonton. And it was, it was hard times.
What was the reason for moving?
Oh, I don't. My mother and dad had met in Edmonton, and for some reason they wanted to go back, and it was just like a horde following, because within 10 years after my dad moving to Edmonton, every last relative from Saskatchewan was in Edmonton. And it wasn't until I married Ray many years later that I actually came back to Saskatchewan, because there was no one left here at all. And so we moved to Edmonton. As I say, times were hard, but I had a very funny thing happen. I suppose I was 3 or around there, and we went to this Greek restaurant. My mother and dad must have had a meal there, because the Greek couple wanted to buy me, and
buy you.
Wanted to buy me, and of course mother and dad didn't sell me. I often wonder what my life would have been if I had sold to the people that owned the Greek restaurant. I'd have probably had more money. But anyway, so that was kind of an interesting thing. Well, then we settled in Edmonton. We moved around to many different places, and it was great. One place we're at a place in the country, which would be downtown Edmonton practically now. But anyway, there was a dairy there, and everybody that worked at the dairy lived there. And I remember this Dutch family had 6 children, and we all used to run together in little packs, and we had a wonderful time. My mother made a skating rink, and we picked berries and swam in the dirty water, and because in the springtime, of course, you'd have all the runoff from the cows in the ditch.
Gosh.
And the ditches were all yellow. They were going yellow. But I think the funniest thing I saw when I was about 5 or so years old was there was a dairy. And here were all these men looking, and there was a cow there, and this man came in this beautiful white shirt. Now, in my world, there were not too many white shirts around. And here he conversed with the people from the dairy for a minute, and he stuck his hand up the cow and brought out all the afterbirth in this beautiful white shirt. I remember that. Anyway, it was really interesting living around the dairy. You went many different things, and then we moved later on to the south side. When I was 10, we went to British Columbia for about a year, not quite a year. My dad and mom, as with everybody of that age, my mother was then 37, my dad 32, and my dad was 36. And we thought that going to BC would be a wonderful adventure. Well, it turned out we practically starved to death. We had this beautiful patch of strawberries, which the hornets all ate. And my poor father had to dig about 6 wells, which all seemed to go dry. And we had no means of living, because we didn't have a pension. Like everybody there had a pension from the First World War, or were pensioners. So there was money for just to live. I mean, not to live well, but we were like a bunch of hillbillies up there in the hills outside Clearwater. And then we decided to move back to Edmonton.
And you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a brother, 6 years younger than I am, Donald. He lives in Vancouver. He went out to British Columbia. Of course, we all went to there, and it was so funny. Dad had already gone back to Edmonton, and Mother and I are not directional at all. So I went to visit this neighbor's house, and by the time we came out, it was pitch black. Mother says, which way do I go? I said, oh heavens, I don't know. And so my 4-year-old brother, he led us all home. But he was a lot of fun too. And I think, I was 10 and he was 4. And the relatives came and they said, oh, that Donald, he's got hair in his chest. Well, I looked and he didn't have any hair in his chest. And I didn't want the relatives to be wrong, so I cut off some of my hair and glued it on his chest. But anyway, so we were there for a while. That was quite an experience, going to a rural school when you're used to going to a big school. And my poor mother tried to make bread, and it disintegrated. I'd go to school with a supposedly a sandwich, and by the time I got to eat it, it was just a piece of beef amongst a whole bunch of crumbs, because Mother could never seem to get that bread together. But anyway, so then we came back to Edmonton, and then my mother and Dad ran a nursing home. And so it was, I'm getting kind of wrong chronological thing. Before I moved to the last place, more or less, that we lived, my mother and Dad and my grandma had a nursing home. That was when I was 8. And they looked after everybody. I saw lots of things, let me tell you. Because we took in everybody, like we just weren't an old folks home, like we took in sick people. And I always remember this one guy, he came with these red spots all over his body. And we were sure he was going to die. He was probably in his 30s. And we found out that he was making home brew in a lead bucket. And he was dying of lead poisoning.
Oh dear.
Do you have to go somewhere?
Can you tell me about your mother?
Oh, yes, my mother was one of 10, 5 boys, 5 girls, raised in the boonies, I mean really far out. My mother said that one winter, Dad or Grandpa worked for the railway, with CP Rail, and they were always in the railway houses that were beside the railway. And my mother said that one winter they were at a place called Robb, and she said the only person she saw was the back of a man's head walking down the railway track. Never saw anybody except of course she had lots of company with all these siblings. And my mother was the second oldest, and she told me that all she remembered was diapers and babysitting. And I know that many women look upon that time as very happy or something, but I think with all the children, they came rather quickly, that it was a bit overwhelming for a young child. Yeah.
What's her birth date?
What is it? It's 1906. She was born in Winnipeg. Yeah.
And so, her parents, were they born in Canada?
Her parents, her mother was from Cardiff. Her father was born in New Brunswick, in Shediac, Brunswick. And as I say, he worked for the railway, and so during Mother's, young life, they were moved around a lot. Went to Golden, went to different places in BC and different places in Alberta, and you always kind of wonder. I always thought my mother's family was a wonder, or at least my grandmother was a wonder. She had 10 children. Lost none of the children in childbirth. None of the children died of an accident. They lived between a lake and a river. Everybody could swim. Nobody drowned. My mother at 46 was the first one to die in the family, which I thought, especially for that era, was so great. My grandmother just, like, when it came to medicine and stuff like that, she was good. Yeah. And Grandpa was very interesting. He taught everybody how to skate, everybody how to swim. And the boys were wonderful blacksmiths. And even the girls, oh yes, taught them how to hunt and skate. And be able to handle a boat. And even the girls had sort of elementary carpentry. My mother could frame a window, she could do this, do that. And all the girls were that way. And so he was in many ways, you know, sort of ahead of his time, because most people that lived in the country, of course, most people had a farm, which my grandpa didn't have, but you know, he took time out to have the children do other things besides work. Yeah, yeah.
Why did your grandparents come to Canada?
My great grandfather came over here as a Welsh choir master. Now apparently he was a shoemaker or something, but I believe from the background that he did come over because of the music. Yeah. My grandmother had a beautiful alto voice. I don't know about her brothers and sisters because I never met any of them. She married in, my grandmother was raised in Ottawa, and she met Grandpa, I think she was 18, and they came across from Ontario to the west, and with the exception, I think, about one of her brothers, no one ever came west. Of course, in those days, people didn't travel that much, and so I never really knew any of her family. Yeah.
Any idea what year your great-grandpa came to Canada?
Yes, it was, I think it was in the, about 1885, 83, something in there, yeah.
Does the family have any documents?
We've tried to get some. We've even tried to get we've never been able to find out. And I have a couple of cousins who've done a lot of work. And never been able to find out what boat they must have come on. They must have landed in Pier 21 in Halifax, coming from Wales, my mother's family. But we have never been able. We've got some census and stuff like that after they came. Like my cousins haven't been able to find census and stuff like that after they came. But and I said if I ever found the boat that they came on, I would go to Pier 21, you know, get someone to enlarge it and have that certainly as a, you know, a family heirloom sort of. But we've never been able to really trace it. And we've tried really hard. Even I went to Pier 21 to find out that actually their history started from 1937 pretty well. Like they're trying to go back, like they've got it from 37 to the present time, Terry, but they haven't really done a lot before that. I mean, they've got the material there, but they haven't processed it, if you know what I mean.
The Canada actually in 2009 have released a whole bunch of documents of boats arriving in Canada that date back to about 1870. So you might
be able to get that. Yeah, I'm hoping so, because they say I'm not too great on it, but I do have a couple of cousins that have done a lot of work, and so that would be nice to know. And I keep in contact with both of them. I see there's one in Seashelt, BC, who is a writer actually, and she does quite a bit of work. And then there's another one of my cousins in Edmonton who does a lot of work on it too. So I'll have to tell them about that. Yeah.
What do you know about your grandparents' life before they came to Canada?
Very little. I don't really know much about them, and we have a very strange thing on my mother's side. Like, I don't know. It's like there was, like it was like my grandfather changed his name or something, and it seems that half the kids were under this Lutz name, and half were under Leslie, and like we're not even sure that Grandma and Grandpa were married, and there's a lot of stuff there that we can't quite figure out. Like Grandpa was a lot older than Grandma, and we can't figure out whether Grandma married a younger brother of his, and what happened to him, we don't know. And all of a sudden she's married to Grandpa, and there's no record of it. Or she's with Grandpa, and they went from the east to the west. So there's kind of a little intrigue and nothing, not really knowing.
Mm-hmm. Do you know your great-grandparents' full names?
Oh, I know on my mother's side, my great-grandparent, yes, he was George. He was George Allen, Allen, and his wife's name was Adelaide. My mother's name was Adelaide. Yeah, and they had, I think they had about five children, I think. I know there was Louise and Grace, and another one, and two brothers. One's name was Frank. There was two. I think there was. So I think in all there were five. Yeah.
And both sides of the family are Welsh?
Yes, yes. Both my great-grandmother and great-grandfather were both from Wales, yeah.
And have you ever been in contact with any relatives that stayed back in Wales?
No, I didn't ever get there. I only got up to, what was it? The name of the place in Wales. I went there in 1990. Anyway, I was right by Mount Snowdon, and climbed Mount Snowdon, I remember that. But I didn't get to Cardiff, no. And it's harder a little bit more when you're traveling with another person that doesn't really have, like had Ray been interested or had Ray lived, maybe we would have gone back. But being, he didn't, most of the time he didn't want to travel, and then say he died before maybe we could have gone back, but I didn't go back after that.
So you said that your great-grandfather...
Oh, no, I know the place of the Wales now, Bangor.
Oh, okay.
Bangor, yeah.
Your great-grandfather was involved with music.
Yes.
And you said he came to Canada, but do you think he actually came because he saw this as a better opportunity to make money with music, as opposed to what he would have had in
Well,
Wales?
yeah, he probably got, he probably got paid to do this, and from all the records, he was actually a shoemaker also, so perhaps for him, it was really good because, maybe he could make some extra money with the music and then have a steady job also. So that's sort of the impression that you got, yes.
Do you know if he already had any children that came on the boat with them?
Yes. The children all were born, from what I gather, the children all were born in Wales. So the five of them came on the boat with him.
And there's no boat stories?
No, we're very bad about, we were very bad about keeping records, and for some reason or other my grandmother just, and of course as children you don't ask the way you should, not everybody's half as good as you are, Terry, about that sort of thing, and so she was very secretive, and none of the grandchildren or even the children seem to really know that much. There were no, like there wasn't a lot of story swapping and that sort of thing. And I spent, of the grandchildren, I spent the most time with Grandma. And yet, even I didn't, although we spent a lot of time together, didn't get that much from her. Just said that she was raised in Ottawa and her family disowned her. I think that was one of the problems too. She told me that the family had disowned her when she married Grandpa. He was pretty wild and woolly.
What can you tell me about your grandparents' interests, hobbies, activities?
Grandfather, I think, was a wonderful boatsman. Like, they had scows on the river and the lake that he operated and things like that. So I think he was wonderful at that. I think he was probably a hunter, a fisherman. I don't think he was much of a farmer. He did work most of the time, like on the railway. Yeah. Grandma was just a wonderful seamstress and cook. She really loved that sort of thing. Quite religious. Both my grandmothers were Anglican. And as I say, she just my grandma Leslie led a very, very simple life, quite removed from Edmonton. She lived 90 miles west of Edmonton beside a lake. And in the summertime, if it rained a lot, the only way you could get out of where they lived was either by horseback or by boat. You could very seldom get in there by car, because they're just corduroy roads and stuff. So she was very isolated, a wonderful berry picker. We used to pick a lot of berries together, that sort of thing.
Do you have
But to me, she seemed very unsuited in many ways for that way of life. Like, she always wore dresses. She was very soft-spoken. She was very mannerly, never drank or smoked. You know what I mean? Like, she just didn't seem the robust, sort of outgoing person that you would associate with somebody that really pioneered it,
Do you have any specific memories that you could tell?
Of grandmother?
Being, doing things with them.
Oh, yes. I used to go berry picking with Grandma all the time. I always can remember that before supper she would give me a little can about this big and say, "Well, Peggy, you go out and you go out and pick raspberries for supper." That was my job. And I was really, when I lived with Grandma and Grandpa, I was really the gopher. You know what I mean? I went for the mail, which was, you had to walk 3 miles there, 3 miles back. And you went, and the train came in. Oh my, that was exciting. And you picked up the mail, and you delivered some of the mail to other neighbors on your way back. And it was just a very thrilling time. And the time I spent, like, building all these rafts that didn't quite float, put them on the lake, and poling around on the lake with the water practically up to my knees. And I also, much of the time, I had a horse while I was there. And my uncle, who was 5 years older than I was, we used to ride a lot together. Did a lot of canoeing, a lot of swimming. And Grandma just never seemed to worry about what you were doing. I mean, in those days, people just didn't worry about their kids. They sent them off, and didn't matter where you were going or what you were doing. Well, they expect you to come back all in one piece, and and you did. So it was quite different. And Grandpa, I felt, by this time was not. By the time that I started to go to spend the summers with him, he was not in good shape. He suffered severely from arthritis and asthma. So when one wasn't getting him the other one was,
Right. Can you tell me about, did your parents, once once they got married, had they ever lived with their parents?
No, but one of the things they did, which was, well, I wouldn't say it was strange exactly, but it was certainly a different period in my life. I was probably 3, maybe 4. And my mother and dad decided that they wanted to work in Edmonton. So I was shipped out to the grandparents for 3 months. And the problem was that Mom and Dad didn't have the money to come and visit, really. And at the end of 3 months, being about three years old, I had forgotten completely about my parents. I mean, Grandma and Grandpa or Mom and Dad, of course. All these other aunts and uncles, I thought I was in heaven, and I got so much attention. It was great. Well, my parents came to pick me up. I screamed and yelled. I did not want to go somewhere with this strange aunt and uncle. I can't believe that I forgot my parents. And so that was kind of a strange time. And if I ever mentioned it to my father, I only mentioned it to him on one occasion. And he just looked devastated. So I never mentioned it again. Yeah. So it was a different time in my life, which was very enjoyable, but a little different than most.
Yep.
And Ray Waters. Ray was dark, and he was big. But he wasn't threatening or anything. He was just sort of quiet, kept to himself.
This is in your classroom?
This is in my classroom when I was in grade 2, in grade 3. And I can always remember at Valentine's Day, everybody thought that they should give this Ray Waters a Valentine.
Right.
So just because I suppose we felt sorry that we didn't seem to be able to communicate with him, and not that he was ever angry or bullying or anything like that. He was just sort of onto himself, and so we all felt, well, maybe we've done something wrong. I think even at this age, and so every last one of them sent him a Valentine. Well, he was so shocked that he got all these Valentines, and the class was so happy to see him with all these Valentines. It was kind of a funny, but the thing I remember in grade 2 was John Carmichael. We had these big windows, huge windows, and one day the teacher stepped out of the room. My God, John Carmichael went and killed a whole bunch of flies on the window, and then he ate them in front of us. And then he ran after all the girls trying to kiss them. Well, you can imagine how we wanted to be kissed by someone who has just eaten a bunch of flies. It was quite funny.
What's your very earliest memory of anything?
I think perhaps 3 years old, falling out of the boat.
And why do you think you remembered that?
Because it was a shock, I guess. I don't know. I just guess for that moment of time you felt very scared and very, yeah. That's about my first recollection now. I can't remember. I really can't remember anything before that.
And where were you living at that time?
That was when I was spending the time with my aunts and uncles when I was living with my grandparents, yeah. Of course, there was enough of them there to rescue me, so I was okay.
How well off would your grandparents have been?
Oh, my grandparents were poor, very poor.
They had their own land, though?
They had their own land. They had a house. They owned some cattle. Sometimes grandma always had chickens. I mean, we certainly weren't hard up for food ever, because lots of ducks and game and the people that, like when the kids all moved to Edmonton, every time they came out, they would bring meat and cereal and all kinds of stuff. And then we had we had what did they call it? It was quite a large building, and it had ice in it, because my uncles used to go out in the lake and get the ice in the wintertime. Put the ice in there in this building, throw sawdust over it to preserve the ice, and that was the ice house. And we were able to preserve a lot of food in that ice house. So the fish and the game and things like that we got, and Grandma was very good at that, as most women were of that era. But she was very good, and so we certainly had enough to eat. And I mean, as a child living there, I really never thought we were short of anything. I mean, there was always the lake and the horses and running in the rain and going and getting the mail and swimming and the relatives came out quite often. So I mean, you had kids to play with, you had aunts and uncles, and you had extended family. It was wonderful. I mean, I was never really aware of being poor, but we really were poor. But I wasn't aware of it, because Mom and Dad, they never whined that much about it. And they gave me lots of love and attention, so that was good.
How strict were your parents and grandparents?
My parents and grandparents were of similar nature. You knew the rules, and they expected you to obey them. If you didn't obey them, they would take you aside and say, I think you're breaking the rules, or I'm not pleased with your behavior. But because they trusted you, and you knew the rules, it wasn't that hard. Because you knew if you did something, you think, oh God, I don't do that. My parents trust me. So I felt as a child that I had the most wonderful childhood that a child could ever have. I mean, my mother and dad loved me. I had lots of cousins. I had lots of extended family. I had an opportunity to swim and to skate and to do all the things and ski and all that kind of stuff. All the things I loved. So I felt that
It was pretty good.
that I had a wonderful life. And it's something isn't it funny, I read a book one time that says a happy childhood, rather than religion or anything else, is something you draw on all your life. And it's true. When you sort of feel badly about things, you always can say to yourself, well, I know my mom and dad really love me. My brother and I, we get together, we always say, well, Donald, you were the prince and I was the princess. You know what I mean? Like, it was really, they never, I certainly got spanked a few times, but certainly for things that I should have got spanked for. I must tell you an incident when I was 6. At this time we were living in the West End in Edmonton, and there were some shirt-tail relatives that lived close by, and of course, being, there was no cars and things like that, kids all ran together. So the 12-year-olds decided it was high time they tried smoking. So we didn't have any smokes. So all we did, like we rolled up dry leaves and stuff like that. And by gosh, if we didn't find a hut to smoke in. So here we were, all us kids smoking away in this hut. Me, the 6-year-old, and all the kids went up to 12. And my God, this policeman walked in. Well, I remember looking up at him. He looked 8 feet tall if he looked an inch. And he told all our parents that we were smoking in this hut. Well, my mother said, I was so embarrassed. I was the youngest one. I was so embarrassed to think that my 6-year-old was smoking, so I got a spanking.
What about religious life in your family?
Oh, quite a bit. Both my grandmothers were staunch Anglicans. This is kind of funny because when we were out at the lake, when I was out with Grandma and Grandpa, we didn't have a radio except we had these batteries. We had these batteries for the radio. But the only time we could use the batteries was when Grandma was listening to her church service from Edmonton. So that's what we saved the batteries for. And I felt that, that we went to church, not when I was as much younger, but when I got a little bit older, say around 12 in there, then I really started to go again, because Mother and Dad, by this time, then had settled down. It's really hard to establish yourself in church when you're always moving. Mm-hmm. We were always moving. So anyway, we finally got established. We went to this one church, and my father sang in the choir, did a lot of work in the church, the heating system, things like that. My mother belonged to the women's group, and I sang in the choir, and I belonged to young peoples. I was very much involved in religion at that time, and we always used to joke. We used to invite people for a trick supper. A trick supper was you got supper and then you had to go to church. But, so it was certainly a part of my life, which it still is today. It's something that I mean, and I wouldn't say that I probably go for all the right reasons. I probably go because of the camaraderie and the tranquility and the general socialization, and particularly the music. That's what I really love most about church, is music.
What was the name of the church that you went to when the family kind of settled?
Oh, Holy Trinity in Edmonton, on 83rd Avenue, about 101st Street, yeah. Oh, a lovely old church, which has been declared a historic site. It's well over 100 years old now. I think it was, when was it? Let's see, in 84, it was 90 years old. So it would be 84, 94. Yeah, it'd be 20 years hence, plus 5, so 25 years old. And that, so it'd be about 125 years old. It's just got beautiful stained glass windows and beautiful brickwork. It's a lovely old church. My mother was buried out of there. I was married out of there, Ray and I. And Seth was too, yeah.
Why did your family move around so much?
We didn't have, I suppose families who are poor move a lot. I guess you think that every place is probably going to be better than the one before, or cheaper, or something. But I know when I was in the West End, we moved 3 or 4 times. When I was on the South Side, we moved again 3 or 4 times at least. And then finally we settled down the last place. We were there for 13 years. So I felt that was the place, but I've moved around a lot in my life. Ray and I moved around a lot.
What did your dad do for a living while you were moving around a lot?
My dad was a wonderful person. The most wonderful father you ever could have, but not too good a provider. He had trouble working for other people. And his problem was that he was not a good businessman. And everything he went into, he managed to make it not work. For whatever reason. My mother and I were absolutely devastated by all the things that happened in that regard. Mind you, we did have which was very cheap to buy at that time, we did have a cabin out at the lake where we went and spent a lot of time with our friends, and Mother and Dad spent a lot of time with their friends. Everybody was welcome. Didn't matter how many kids my brother brought, or I brought, or they brought. Everybody just sort of wandered in and out at random, relatives, whoever. And it was a great place, But we didn't. As I say, my dad, we tried several businesses, and businesses that should have made a mint at that time. Well, Dad, he decided he'd quarrel with people, and he would be stubborn and obnoxious and all those things when he was in business for himself. And so he ruined the business. And he refused to work for somebody else. And as I say, when he did go into business for himself, he never made any money. And it was only when Mother had the nursing home for, like they had the nursing home for about 7 years, something like that. Well then, they did all right. Didn't make a lot of money, Terry, but at least it kept the food on the table. At that time, there was no government help for anybody. Those poor people that we had in the nursing home earned $30 a month. My mother earned $1 a day for those people. We did their laundry, we fed them, we kept them, and what my mother felt the worst about was the fact that those people didn't have a nickel or a piece of candy, a cigarette, new clothes, nothing. Those people were destitute.
Why did your parents get into this profession, and what year was that?
Oh, no, that would have been about, let me see, about 1937. My grandmother was a nurse. My dad's mother was a nurse from England. And so that's how come originally they opened a nursing home that wasn't really a nursing home just for old people, it was for sick people. And I had a picture, or saw a picture of this woman named Lena Wedman who was on her back, couldn't get off the bed, and Grandma gave her water treatments and exercises and stuff like that. And she ended up walking quite well. The one side was still sort of bad, this is some polio, but she did manage to walk, and she was able to knit and to do all kinds of things, got married and everything.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What time is it?
Oh, that was the reason they got into it. And in those days, there wasn't that much that women really could do, if you know what I mean. There wasn't that much opportunity.
Was there any regulations about them actually being able to do that for a profession? Like training?
No, there was nothing.
So in terms of medication?
Well, she never really gave any medication. Yeah, she once in a while, they would send somebody in there that used to have what we called irrigation, like they would drain something or something like that. And because my mother was very interested in medicine, never had the opportunity really to do anything about it, but because she was very interested in medicine, she was well recognized by, say, hospitals and doctors and stuff, that she was able to do certain things with the patients, yes, when they were released from the hospital, yeah.
And you said the reason for them going into that occupation was?
Because Grandma, my dad's mother, was a nurse, and so Mom and Dad sort of went in with her, and that lasted for about, I'd say maybe 3 years, and then Mom got her own nursing home after. Yeah.
What kind of jobs did your father do before that?
Well, my dad had no education. I mean, he only went to grade 3 at school. He worked on the farm. It was Depression days. I know that he worked quite hard. Well, this is really funny. My grandmother had this ointment called Craven's Ointment. Now, this was made up of sulfur, eucalyptus, and Epsom salts. Now, this stuff, if you mixed it right, was really good, because the eucalyptus would keep it porous, would keep it moist. Like, I used it for years. Rather than use the eucalyptus, I used lanolin with the sulfur and the Epsom salts. I used it on the kids when they had burns. I used it on my horses. I use it on all kind of things. And but I can't, I've never had the recipe for it, so I don't mix it in the right proportion, so I have a tough time with it. But anyway, my dad peddled Craven's ointment on horseback. I remember that. And and we always, in our family, we always had a jar of Craven's ointment. This was standard procedure. And let's talk about this ointment. This funny stuff was, we all got the scabies. Oh, itching. Have you ever had scabies, Terry? Oh, did you ever have the scabies? Oh, it was so bad, the itching. So they gave us this black type ointment. My God, it stunk to high heaven. And it didn't seem to be doing that much good. And I always remember coming home from school, and here my mother was putting this ointment on I'd say my brother was maybe 7 or 8 years old at this time, naked as a jaybird, up on the table, holding his nose because of the smell of this ointment. My dad said, enough of this, to hell with this stuff, he said. We all have to have a sulfur bath. So we had our sulfur bath and we got rid of scabies after all that problem. So he was good too, in that regard. Like, he had a few good ideas, yeah.
Did your dad have any bad vices?
No, my dad, I'll tell you, he was wonderful. I never saw a man I never saw my father overdrink. Like, he would take maybe 2 drinks, and he was the life of the party. I mean, he had a personality to die for, my dad. Everyone just loved Harry. And, but he, and the same with smoking. He loved his cigars. Maybe once every 2 weeks, he would go out and smoke about 4 cigars and just have a ball. But that was it. Like, when it came to drinking and smoking, he had excellent control. As they say, the only thing that I thought was wrong with my father was the way that he managed his money. But other than that, he was a wonderful person, very, very much liked by the whole family, very kind, yeah.
When and where was your dad born?
He was born in Bury, England, in, I think, 1901, yeah. And
when did he come?
he came when he was, I think he was 2. And my dad was always a bit of a clown, and he said, even on the boat coming over, he was always entertaining. No, he was 4, he was 4. And my aunt that came with him was 2. Can you imagine this woman coming from England, recently lost her husband, with these 2 kids going to this country where she knew no one?
Pretty rough.
We wonder where bravery ends and stupidity begins, yeah. So.
Okay, and tell me about your mother. Where was she born?
She was born, my mother? She was born in Winnipeg, about 06, yeah.
And how did your parents meet?
My mother was working in a restaurant. My father was smitten.
He was what?
Smitten.
Where was the restaurant?
It was the old King Edward restaurant in Edmonton.
So she was working there and he just
He
met
went
her.
there for a cup of coffee. His whole life changed, yes.
And what year would that be?
Oh, that would be about 1920, probably 27, 28, yeah.
And they were married?
I don't really, I think they're married, they're married, I think, in April of, probably of, let's see, of 28, yeah.
So you're a honeymoon baby.
I'm a honeymoon baby.
Okay. Do you remember how the Depression directly affected your parents and your grandparents?
Well, I know my dad, he worked hard to try and get something. I remember him talking to my mother when I was about 6 and saying, right now I'm earning 25 cents a day selling eggs, you know what I mean? It was hard, but they were, people are quite inventive in many ways. My mother and dad had no money, and neither did anybody that lived around us or any of our relatives or anything. I mean, I never knew anybody that had money, except maybe our dentist or something like that. Yeah, the dentist had money. But I mean, you didn't know, and so for entertainment, my parents went to the neighbor's house and they played cards and had a little bit to eat, and that was sort of it. Or, entertained through church things and, as I say, relative stuff. Like they certainly made their own fun, and my mother's side particularly. We did, we'd go out and my uncle would have a guitar and we'd all sing and, and I felt in many ways as a child looking at it a good life, but I'm certainly my parents worried about finances and everything, you know what I mean? But they always kept it from me, so I didn't really know. And whereas I felt with Ray, he was quite conscious of it. And I just never was.
What were your parents doing when you were living with your grandparents?
Oh, they were working in Edmonton, saving all their money so they'd come and pick me up and they could have a few dollars, because it was really hard, because in those days you didn't get paid very much and there was nowhere more or less for my parents to leave me, so that's the reason I ended up at Grandpa's place, which was wonderful. But yeah.
Did any of your close relatives fight in World War One?
No, not in World War One. Certainly in World War II, I had 3 uncles, but they never made it overseas, so they were okay.
So when the war started, how did that affect your family in any way?
Yeah, the war started in September of 1939. I remember I was 10 years old, and I was in Clearwater at the time, and then we came back. I was back in Edmonton by November, yeah.
What were you doing in Clearwater?
Well, basically nothing. We're trying to make a go of things, but my father really tried to do something with lumber, but of course he knew nothing about lumber, so that wasn't a very good thing. So he came back to Edmonton with 29 cents, I think. Started to work here, yeah. And then Mother and I followed, yeah. And my brother, yeah.
Do you remember any of the houses that you lived in when you were young in Edmonton?
Oh, yes.
Would you remember where they are?
Yes, I know exactly where most of them are, yeah. I lived on 142nd Street. Remember, it was a very small house, but my room had a kind of shelving along one side, and I remember I used to line up all my dolls, which I had names for, and I remember that. I remember that was when we did the smoking, and that's certainly when I did a lot of skating, and it was a pretty nice life, actually, yeah. And it was, and I remember living in some of my other houses. I remember particularly the one that we lived at when my dad was working for the dairy. Yeah. Again, it was a very small house, but it was nice, yeah.
Where did you get the skates and the dolls and the toys?
Well, the skates, my dad, I think, got for 75 cents. He was on a milk route, and so I bought these skates for 75 cents. I still remember them. Great they were. and they had a sort of a flap over with a strap that tightened, and my mother had me skating at 4, and then when we moved closer into Edmonton, to West Edmonton, then I had a skating rink maybe 6 blocks away. Used to go there all the time, yeah.
How was Christmas as a child?
I don't remember getting very much. I remember it as being a very happy time. My mother making things for me, and I must tell you something funny about Christmas. This really was before I remembered Christmas, but I guess I was probably 2, and of course I was an only child, and my mother and dad had gone and bought me this tricycle. Well, they were so thrilled with this tricycle that they got me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to ride this tricycle around the tree. I mean, I don't remember that, but my parents tell me about that they were so excited about the tricycle, they got me up to ride the tricycle around the tree.
Did you take any lessons as a child?
Yes, I took music lessons, and I was very bad about practicing, so of course I never really did anything. I took violin for a while, and actually I didn't mind the violin, but my problem was I never had a very good ear, and I could never tune it. And so that was sort of the end of the violin, because I had people tune it, and I'd go to play something for somebody, and my God, it was about 3 octaves higher, and the violin it squeaks anyway. It was really, my brother took piano. He played the piano not too well. I took guitar lessons. I played the guitar not too well either. But this is really funny. My mother and dad go out to a party. And they come back to the house maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. They would rout my brother and I out of bed to play for the guests. Well, as I say, my brother wasn't any good on the piano, and I certainly wasn't that good on the guitar. But I guess at that time of the morning, who cares? So we all sang, and he played the piano, and I played the guitar. And then later on, I went back to the guitar when I was about 20. And by this time, of course, I was paying for my own lessons. And I had a girlfriend that I worked with at the telephone office who was a wonderful guitar player. And I used to take lessons, and I'd go out with her, and we'd practice together and play duets. It was so much fun. And I worked at the telephone office, and there was these girls all from Saskatchewan. One that sang soprano, one that sang alto, Ruth, who played the guitar and sang harmony, and I sang the melody. And we did 4-part harmony. It was really something. Yeah, it was good because these girls were really good. And unfortunately, it didn't last very long. Some of them went back to Saskatchewan, got married, and we all drifted apart. But it was a wonderful time in my life for music and for that sort of thing. But again, with the guitar, I was at the same disadvantage I was with the violin. I couldn't tune it.
How did your parents justify paying for lessons when times were tough?
Well, to them, it was really important. And I've heard that from so many other people, that their parents somehow managed to scrape up enough money to pay for guitar lessons or piano lessons in my brother's case, or in my case when I tried piano but didn't really succeed. Yeah, but they wanted me to have it. But unless you're a very, very motivated child. When I was older, when I took up the guitar, it was different. But as a child, unless your parents, to my way of thinking, are very, very strict and are very diligent about your practicing, that oftentimes children don't make it. Like with Ray and I, with music, he said, there's no way you're going to quit your music. And I made sure they practiced, and I was the one that drove them to their lessons. So it was all my 3 children playing, and were actually, quite successful at it. So.
Do you have any specific childhood memory that you'd say is like the greatest day of your childhood?
I think one of the memories I have was on Sundays. We had this little hill. I lived near a place called Mill Creek, which was just, for a tomboy, it was an enchanted place, let me tell you. Wander around there spring and summer, and in the wintertime, we used to go up to, had this little hill, and we used to ski down the hill and put the skis on our shoulder and walk up the hill. And that's what sort of everybody did of a Sunday. And that was wonderful. But I think the most lovely thing about living in Scona at that time was at 4 o'clock every day, the bell would ring and we all had our skates, and we would go down to the local skating rink, and they would play beautiful music till 5:30, and then we'd all go home. Then on New Year's Eve, one year, or I don't know how many years it lasted, but we had this big rink, big pleasure skating rink that we had, and then we had a little alleyway between with ice on it, but we were never allowed in the hockey rink, and the hockey players were never allowed in the pleasure skating rink. So at New Year's, we skated the old year out and the new year in, and then of course you'd shut off all the lights, and of course you'd probably grab the one you thought was really nice, and that was your New Year's. But it was enchanting to do that, yeah.
Interesting. So, what I'm gonna do is I have to change my tape.
I've talked too much.
No, that's good. We're just getting started. I wondered if it would be smarter to take Alec back now.
Yes, I think she has no idea of time. I'll